The elevator hummed quietly as it carried Washington to the 52nd floor of the gleaming steel and glass tower that housed Henderson Global Industries. At 63 years old, moved with the steady rhythm of someone who had been cleaning these same floors for over 2 decades. Her dark hands, weathered from years of hard work, gripped the handle of her cleaning cart as she watched the numbers climb higher and higher. Had seen this building transform from a modest 15-story structure into the towering monument to success it was today. She had watched young executives come and go, witnessed mergers that shook the business world, and quietly observed the rise of one man in particular, James Henderson, the billionaire CEO whose empire now spanned 3 continents. What James Henderson didn't know, what none of the executives rushing past in their expensive suits knew, was that this humble janitor was quietly changing the world in her own way. Every 2 weeks, when received her paycheck of $840, she would cash it at the small bank branch in the building's lobby. Then, with careful precision, she would divide the money in half. $420 would go toward her own modest needs, rent for her small apartment, groceries, utilities, and bus fare. The other $420 would disappear into a different world entirely, a world that James Henderson was about to discover. His morning routine never varied. She would arrive at 4:30 in the morning, change into her uniform in the basement locker room, and begin her methodical journey through the building. She cleaned the lobby first, ensuring that every marble surface gleamed under the bright lights. Then came the lower floors, working her way up systematically, floor by floor. By the time the first executives arrived at 7, would be halfway through the building, invisible to most but essential to all. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, was humming softly to herself as she polished the conference room table on the 38th floor. The melody was an old gospel song her grandmother had sung to her as a child, a tune that carried her through the long hours and reminded her of why she did what she did. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across the room where million-dollar deals were negotiated daily. Didn't notice the man standing in the doorway watching her. James Henderson had arrived earlier than usual, unable to sleep after reviewing quarterly reports that showed his company's profits had reached new heights. At 45, James stood 6 feet tall with graying temples and the kind of confident bearing that came from building an empire from nothing. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit that cost more than made in 3 months, but something about the peaceful scene before him made him pause. He watched as carefully arranged the chairs around the conference table, ensuring each one was perfectly positioned. She moved with a quiet dignity that struck him as oddly compelling. When she began to dust the expensive artwork on the walls, treating each piece with the same careful attention she would give to precious family heirlooms, James found himself genuinely curious about this woman who had been part of his building's landscape for so long. Finally noticed him standing there and immediately straightened up, her expression shifting to one of professional courtesy. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that spoke of roots far from this gleaming tower. "I can come back later if you need the room." "No, please continue," James replied, stepping into the room. "I was just impressed by how carefully you take care of everything up here. You've been with us for quite a while, haven't you?" 22 years this November," answered, pride evident in her voice despite her humble tone. She had watched this man grow from an ambitious young entrepreneur into one of the most powerful business leaders in the country, but she had never exchanged more than polite greetings with him before. James nodded thoughtfully. He prided himself on knowing his business inside and out, but he realized he knew virtually nothing about the people who kept his empire running smoothly behind the scenes. 22 years is a significant commitment. I hope we've been good to you." Smiled, a genuine warmth lighting up her face. "This job has been a blessing, Mr. Henderson. It's allowed me to do things I never could have imagined when I first started here." There was something in the way she said it that caught James's attention. Most people spoke about their jobs in terms of what they received: salary, benefits, security. Spoke as if her job had enabled her to give something to the world. Before he could pursue the thought further, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his assistant about an unexpected board meeting, and the moment was lost. As James hurried toward the elevator, he found himself thinking about words. That evening, during a quiet moment in his penthouse office, he pulled up her employment file on his computer. The basic facts were all there: Washington, age 63, hired as part of the night cleaning crew in 2002. perfect attendance record, no disciplinary actions, consistently positive supervisory reviews. But none of it explained the sense of purpose he had detected in her voice that morning. Over the next few days, James found himself paying more attention to the building's support staff. He noticed how always arrived before dawn and worked with quiet efficiency. He observed how other employees greeted her warmly, how she remembered personal details about security guards and office workers alike. There was clearly more to this woman than her simple job description suggested. It was coworker, who inadvertently provided the first real clue about other life. Had been cleaning offices alongside for 8 years, and the two women had developed a close friendship built on shared early morning hours and mutual respect. One Thursday evening, as they were finishing their shift, mentioned that her youngest son had been accepted into a special after-school program. "I don't know how we would have managed the fees," confided to as they restocked their cleaning supplies. "But that wonderful foundation you told me about came through with a scholarship. My Carlos will get help with his homework and hot meals every day after school. It's like a miracle." His face glowed with quiet satisfaction. "Every child deserves a chance to reach their full potential," she said simply. "Education opens doors that stay closed otherwise." What didn't know was that had personally called the foundation and advocated for Carlos, even offering to supplement the scholarship fund if necessary. It was one of dozens of similar interventions made throughout the year, quietly connecting families in need with resources they might not have known existed. James happened to be walking past the supply closet when he overheard this conversation. The mention of a foundation intrigued him, especially given its obvious emotional investment in this young boy's success. As a businessman, James understood the power of strategic philanthropy, but this sounded like something more personal and immediate. The next morning, James made an unusual decision. Instead of heading straight to his office, he stopped by the security desk in the lobby and struck up a conversation with Carter, the head of building security. Had been working the morning shift for 15 years and knew every employee in the building by name. "Tell me about Washington," James said casually, as if he were simply making small talk. "She seems like a remarkable employee." His face lit up immediately. "Miss, she's one of the finest people I've ever known, Mr. Henderson. That woman has a heart bigger than this whole building. You know, she volunteers at 3 different community centers on her days off, and she's always organizing collections for families going through hard times." "Collections?" James asked, genuinely curious. "Oh yes, sir. Just last month when Tom Bradley down in maintenance had that heart attack and couldn't work for 6 weeks, Miss organized a fund to help his family with medical bills. She went around to every department, talked to everyone personally, raised over $3,000, and I know for a fact she contributed more than anyone else, even though she makes less than most folks here." This information painted a picture that James found both impressive and puzzling. How could someone earning barely above minimum wage be so generous with others? What was driving this level of giving? That afternoon, James did something he had never done before. He asked his personal assistant, Sarah, to discreetly research local community organizations and after-school programs. What he discovered was a network of grassroots programs serving underprivileged children throughout the city, many of them struggling with limited funding and resources. As he reviewed the information, James began to understand the scope of the need. Single mothers working multiple jobs had nowhere safe to send their children after school. Families living in food deserts couldn't provide adequate nutrition for growing kids. Children with academic potential were falling behind because they lacked access to tutoring and educational support. The problem seemed overwhelming, yet somehow found ways to make a difference. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later, during a chance encounter that would change both of their lives forever. James was leaving the building late one evening when he noticed waiting at the bus stop across the street. It was nearly 9 o'clock, well past her normal shift hours, and she appeared to be carrying several large bags along with her usual purse. On impulse, James instructed his driver to pull over. He rolled down the window and called out, "Can I offer you a ride somewhere? It's pretty late to be waiting for the bus." Looked surprised but grateful. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Henderson, but I'm not going straight home tonight. I'm headed to the community center. It's probably out of your way." "I'd be happy to take you there," James insisted, stepping out of the car to help her with her bags. As he lifted them, he was surprised by their weight and contents. Through the thin plastic, he could see boxes of mac and cheese, canned goods, packages of socks, and what appeared to be school supplies. During the 20-minute drive to the community center, explained that Thursday evenings were when she helped serve dinner to families in the neighborhood. A lot of working parents don't get home until late, she said, and the children need a good meal and a safe place to do their homework. The center tries to bridge that gap. As they pulled up to a modest brick building that had seen better days, James was struck by the warm light spilling from the windows and the sound of children's laughter echoing from inside. Thanked him for the ride and began gathering her bags, but James found himself saying, "Would it be all right if I came in with you? I'd like to see what you're doing here." Looked uncertain for a moment, then nodded. "Of course, Mr. Henderson, but I should warn you it can get pretty chaotic in there. We're not running a boardroom meeting." What James discovered inside the community center challenged every assumption he had about effective resource allocation and community impact. The main room was filled with long tables where children ranging in age from 5 to 15 were eating dinner, working on homework, and engaging in animated conversations with adult volunteers. The atmosphere was one of warmth and belonging, despite the obviously limited budget evident in the mismatched furniture and worn decorations. Moved through the room like a beloved family member, greeting each child by name and inquiring about their day at school. She helped a 7-year-old with reading comprehension, mediated a dispute between two teenagers over a math problem, and somehow managed to serve food and clean up spills while maintaining meaningful conversations with a dozen different kids. James watched in fascination as unpacked her bags, distributing the groceries to the kitchen volunteers, and handing out new socks and school supplies to children who clearly needed them. When a young girl named Shiley approached about a torn backpack, immediately pulled out a brand new one from her seemingly endless supply of provisions. "Miss always knows exactly what we need," confided to James, her gap-toothed smile radiating pure joy. "She says education is the key that unlocks all the doors in the world." As the evening progressed, James found himself drawn into conversations with the children and other volunteers. He learned about single mothers working double shifts, fathers struggling to find steady employment, and grandparents raising on fixed incomes. But he also discovered remarkable resilience, intelligence, and hope among these young people who faced challenges he had never imagined. The center's director, Mrs. Williams, eventually approached James to thank him for the unexpected donation. "I don't know what you said to," she explained, "but she mentioned you might be interested in supporting our programs." James realized that had somehow interpreted his presence as a sign of potential partnership rather than mere curiosity. The assumption was both presumptuous and oddly flattering. Here was a woman who earned less in a year than he spent on a single business lunch, yet she had the confidence to believe she could inspire a billionaire to join her cause. As they prepared to leave that evening, James helped carry some empty containers back to his car. "How long have you been volunteering here?" he asked. "About 18 years, replied matter-of-factly. "I started coming here not long after I began working at your building. I realized I was blessed to have steady work, and I wanted to share that blessing with others." "And you do this every week?" "Thursdays here, Saturdays at the Lincoln Park Center, and Sundays at its after-school program. There's always more need than there are hands to help." James did quick calculations in his head. It was volunteering 3 days a week and working 5 days at his building that left her virtually no time for herself. "When do you rest?" Laughed, a sound full of genuine contentment. "Mr. Henderson, when you're doing work that feeds your soul, you don't need as much rest. These children give me more energy than they take." During the quiet ride back to his neighborhood, James found himself grappling with questions he had never seriously considered before. His own philanthropic efforts consisted mainly of large donations to established charities, transactions handled by his accountants, and designed as much for tax benefits as for social impact. He wrote checks to organizations he never visited, supporting causes he understood only in abstract terms. His approach was the complete opposite. She gave not just money, but time, attention, and personal commitment. She knew the names and stories of the children she helped. She understood their specific needs and responded with targeted assistance. Most remarkably, she did all of this while earning a modest salary that barely covered her own basic expenses. As James watched walk up the steps to her small apartment building, he realized that he had just witnessed something extraordinary. This woman had somehow figured out how to create meaningful change in the world using nothing but determination, compassion, and a willingness to sacrifice her own comfort for others. She was accomplishing more real good with her limited resources than many people achieved with unlimited wealth. That night, as James sat in his luxurious penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering city lights, he couldn't stop thinking about the children at the community center. He thought about Joy over a simple backpack, about the teenager who had proudly shown him a B+ on a math test, about the way presence seemed to transform an ordinary community room into a place of hope and possibility. The next morning brought an unusual restlessness to James Henderson's routine. Instead of diving immediately into the stack of acquisition reports waiting on his desk, he found himself standing at his office window, watching the early morning traffic flow through the streets below. Somewhere in that maze of buses and cars was Washington, making her way to another day of work that she somehow managed to transform into a mission of service. James had built his fortune by identifying patterns and opportunities that others missed. Now, for the first time, he was applying that analytical mind to questions of purpose and impact rather than profit margins and market share. The previous evening had opened a door he hadn't even known existed, revealing a world where success was measured not in dollars, but in transformed lives. His contemplation was interrupted by Sarah, his assistant, who entered with his morning briefing. "Your 10 o'clock meeting with the group has been moved to 11, she announced, reviewing her tablet. "And your wife called to remind you about the charity gala tomorrow night." The mention of the charity gala struck James as oddly ironic. Tomorrow evening, he would be attending a lavish fundraiser where wealthy socialites would bid on luxury items while congratulating themselves on their charitable spirit. The entire event would likely cost more to organize than donated to her community centers in several years, yet its direct impact on individual lives far exceeded anything these formal charity events achieved. "Sarah," James said suddenly, "I want you to research something for me. Find out everything you can about grassroots community programs in our area. I'm particularly interested in after-school programs, food assistance, and educational support for underprivileged children." Sarah looked surprised but made notes on her tablet. "Are you considering expanding our corporate philanthropy initiatives?" "Something like that," James replied, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was considering. "Also, see if you can arrange for me to have lunch with Washington from our cleaning staff. Make it somewhere comfortable but private where we can talk without interruption." If Sarah was puzzled by this unusual request, she was too professional to show it. Within 2 hours, she had arranged for a quiet corner table at a modest restaurant near the building, chosen specifically because it was the kind of place where would feel comfortable rather than intimidated. When arrived for lunch that day, she was wearing her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit that was clearly well-maintained despite its age. She seemed nervous as she sat across from one of the most powerful men in the city, but there was also a quiet dignity in her bearing that impressed James once again. "I hope you don't mind me asking you here," James began after they had ordered their meals. "After last night, I realized I know very little about the work you do outside our building, and I'm genuinely curious to learn more." Relaxed slightly, her natural warmth beginning to show through her initial nervousness. "What would you like to know, Mr. Henderson?" "Let's start with how this all began. When did you first get involved with community work?" His eyes took on a distant look as she remembered. "It started when I was a little girl growing up in rural Alabama. My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. We didn't have much money, but grandmother always found ways to help neighbors who had even less. During the summer months, she would cook huge pots of soup and take them to families where the father was out of work or someone was sick." She paused to sip her water, gathering her thoughts. "I remember asking her once why we gave away food when we barely had enough for ourselves. She told me something I'll never forget. 'Child, when you share what little you have, God always makes sure there's enough to go around. But when you hoard what you have out of fear, you'll find it never feels like enough.'" James found himself leaning forward, genuinely engaged by story. In the boardroom, he was accustomed to presentations full of charts and statistics. This simple narrative carried more emotional weight than any PowerPoint presentation he had ever seen. "After I finished high school," continued, "I moved up north looking for better opportunities, found work in factories, restaurants, offices, wherever I could get hired. But I always remembered what my grandmother taught me about sharing. Even when I was making minimum wage and living in a tiny studio apartment, I would set aside a little money to help someone who needed it more. And when you started working at our building, that's when everything changed, said, her face lighting up with memory. I was making more money than I ever had before, steady work with good benefits. For the first time in my life, I had security. But I kept thinking about all the children in my neighborhood who didn't have that security, who were going to bed hungry or falling behind in school because their parents were working multiple jobs just to pay rent. Explained how she had started small, volunteering one evening a week at a local church that served meals to families. But I quickly realized that feeding children one night a week wasn't enough. They needed consistent support, safe places to do homework, adults who believed in their potential. That's when I started looking for ways to contribute more. Is that when you began donating half your salary? James asked gently. Looked surprised that he knew this detail, but nodded. It seemed like the right thing to do. I calculated how much I needed to cover my basic expenses, rent, groceries, transportation, a little bit for emergencies, and everything else went to the children. Not just money, but time and attention. Money helps, but what those kids really need is for adults to show up consistently and care about their futures. As their meals arrived, James found himself marveling at the mathematical precision of generosity. She had created a systematic approach to giving that was more sophisticated than many corporate philanthropy programs he had encountered. Yet her motivation was entirely personal and emotional rather than strategic. Tell me about the children you work with, James said. What are their biggest challenges? His expression grew more serious as she considered the question. The challenges are different for each family, but there are common themes. Many of the children live in single-parent households where the parent is working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. These parents love their children deeply, but they're exhausted and overwhelmed. They don't have time to help with homework or attend school events. They worry constantly about providing basic necessities. She took a bite of her sandwich before continuing. The children often go home to empty apartments after school. They're responsible for taking care of younger siblings, preparing their own meals, and doing homework without any adult guidance. Many of them are incredibly mature and responsible, but they're still children who need support and encouragement. What about educational challenges? James asked, thinking about the homework assistants he had observed at the community center. That's one of the biggest issues, replied passionately. These children are just as intelligent and capable as kids from wealthy families, but they don't have access to the same resources. Their schools are often underfunded and overcrowded. At home, there might not be a quiet place to study or even basic supplies like pencils and paper. If they fall behind in reading or math in elementary school, it becomes harder and harder to catch up as they get older. Went on to describe specific children she worked with, whose mother cleaned office buildings at night and slept during the day, leaving him to care for his 2 younger sisters. Destiny, a brilliant student who struggled with math because no one at home could help her with homework, who had tremendous artistic talent but no money for art supplies or classes. Every single one of these children has incredible potential, said with conviction. They just need adults who believe in them and provide consistent support. When you see a 10-year-old's face light up because they finally understand a math concept, or watch a teenager graduate from high school knowing they'll be the first in their family to attend college, that's when you understand why this work is so important. James was struck by the specificity of knowledge about these children. She didn't speak in general terms about helping the less fortunate the way he often heard at charity events. She knew individual names, personal struggles, specific achievements. Her giving wasn't abstract philanthropy, but deeply personal investment in real lives. How do you decide which programs to support? James asked, genuinely curious about her decision-making process. Smiled, I go where the need is greatest and where I can see that my contribution makes a real difference. The community center where we went last night serves about 60 children every week. My donations help pay for food, supplies, and part-time tutoring staff. At the Lincoln Park Center, they focus more on older teenagers, helping with job training and college preparation. Runs a weekend program for kids whose families are going through crisis situations. She explained how she researched each organization before getting involved, visiting personally to meet the staff and understand their approach. I want to make sure my money goes directly to serving children, not to overhead costs or administrative salaries. These grassroots programs are usually run by people who care deeply about the work, but don't necessarily have business training. Sometimes I help with more than just donations, organizing volunteers, connecting them with other resources, helping them apply for grants. James realized that had essentially become a one-woman community development specialist, using her limited resources with remarkable efficiency and impact. Have you ever considered trying to scale up what you're doing, involving other people or organizations? I've thought about it, admitted, but I'm just one person with a high school education. I don't have the connections or credentials to approach wealthy donors or big foundations. I do what I can with what I have, and I trust that others are doing the same in their own ways. The humility in her response struck James profoundly. Here was someone creating measurable positive change in her community, yet she saw herself as simply doing her small part rather than leading a movement. Her lack of ego and self-promotion stood in stark contrast to the business world James inhabited, where people fought for credit and recognition for far lesser achievements. As they finished their meal, James found himself grappling with questions that went beyond mere curiosity about's work. Her approach to giving challenged fundamental assumptions he had held about charity and social impact. She had shown him that proximity and personal commitment could be more powerful than large institutional donations, that knowing the specific people you're helping created accountability and precision that was often missing from traditional philanthropy. James said as they prepared to leave, "What you're doing is remarkable. I'm wondering if there might be ways for me to support your efforts or learn from your approach." Looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Mr. Henderson, any support would be wonderful, but I want you to understand something important. This work isn't about making yourself feel good or getting recognition. It's about showing up consistently, building relationships, and making long-term commitments to real people. It's not glamorous, and the results take time to become visible." Her gentle warning carried the wisdom of someone who had seen well-meaning people start charitable projects with great fanfare only to abandon them when the initial excitement wore off. She was essentially asking whether James was prepared for the unglamorous, daily work of actually caring for people rather than simply writing checks. "I understand," James replied, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. "Would it be possible for me to visit some of the other programs you support? I'd like to understand the full scope of what you're doing." Agreed, and as they walked back toward the building, she began describing the weekend programs at Lincoln Park and James listened carefully, but part of his mind was already working on larger questions. If one woman earning less than $30,000 a year could have such significant impact through strategic giving and personal commitment, what might be possible with greater resources applied using her principles? That afternoon, James found himself unable to concentrate on his usual work. The merger documents and financial projections that normally commanded his complete attention seemed somehow less urgent than they had the day before. Instead, he kept thinking about the children had described, imagining their daily struggles and wondering how many promising young lives were being limited by lack of opportunity and support. For the first time in his career, James Henderson was beginning to understand the difference between charity and justice, between giving away surplus wealth and actually redistributing opportunity. Wasn't just helping individual children. She was challenging an entire system that left capable young people behind simply because they had been born into the wrong circumstances. As evening approached, James made an unprecedented decision. Instead of staying late to review contracts as he usually did, he left the office at 5:30 and drove to the Lincoln Park Community Center where would be volunteering. He wanted to see her work in a different setting, to understand how her approach adapted to different needs and different children. What he discovered there would deepen his appreciation for wisdom and further. The Lincoln Park Community Center occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that city planners had long since written off as economically depressed. But as James walked through the front door on Saturday afternoon, he encountered an energy and purposefulness that contradicted any assumptions about urban decay. The main room buzzed with activity as teenagers worked on computers, collaborated on group projects, and engaged in animated discussions with adult mentors. Spotted him immediately and approached with a welcoming smile, though he could see surprise in her eyes. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her during their interactions at the office building. Here, in this environment, her natural leadership qualities were more apparent than ever. "Mr. Henderson, I'm so glad you decided to come," she said warmly. Saturday afternoons are when we focus on older kids, mostly high school students who are thinking about college and career paths. It's a different energy than the younger children you met on Thursday. As led him through the center, James was impressed by the purposeful organization of the space. One corner featured a computer lab where students were working on college applications and scholarship essays. Another area had been set up as a mock interview station where teenagers practiced job interview skills with adult volunteers. Near the windows, a group of students was engaged in a lively debate about current events, guided by a volunteer who was helping them develop critical thinking and public speaking abilities. The focus here is on transition planning, explained. Many of these young people will be the first in their families to attend college, so they need extra support navigating the application process. Others are planning to enter the workforce directly after high school, so we help them develop professional skills and make connections with potential employers. James noticed that several of the teenagers greeted with obvious affection and respect. She knew details about their academic progress, family situations, and future plans. When a young man named Tyler approached them, immediately asked about his recent SAT scores and whether he had heard back from any of the colleges where he had applied. "Miss helped me write my personal statement," Tyler explained to James with obvious gratitude. "She spent 3 hours with me one Sunday afternoon, helping me understand what the admissions committees wanted to hear. I never would have figured that out on my own." As Tyler returned to his work, explained that college application support was one of the most crucial services the center provided. "These students have the grades and the potential," she said, "but the college application process is like navigating a foreign country if no one in your family has ever done it before. Simple things like understanding the difference between regular admission and early action, or knowing that you need to submit financial aid forms by specific deadlines. These details can make or break a student's chances." James watched as moved among the teenagers, offering encouragement here, answering questions there, somehow managing to provide individual attention while keeping track of multiple ongoing activities. Her approach was both maternal and professional, combining genuine caring with high expectations for academic performance and personal responsibility. In the computer lab, James met Jasmine, a 17-year-old whose goal was to become a veterinarian. She was working on scholarship applications while simultaneously taking online advanced placement courses to strengthen her college transcript. "Miss connected me with a veterinarian who lets me volunteer at her clinic," Jasmine explained. "She said I needed real experience to write convincing essays about why I want this career. Now I've worked with animals for 6 months, and I know for sure this is what I want to do." The level of strategic thinking behind mentoring impressed James enormously. She wasn't just providing emotional support or financial assistance. She was helping young people develop the kind of social capital and practical knowledge that middle-class families took for granted, but that could be transformative for first-generation college students. In another corner of the center, James encountered a soft-spoken 18-year-old who was preparing to enter a certification program for heating and air conditioning repair. "College isn't for everyone," had told, "but that doesn't mean you can't have a successful career and a good life. The skilled trades pay well, and there's always demand for people who can do the work reliably." Explained that it helped him research different trade programs, arrange job shadowing opportunities with local contractors, and even practice the math skills he would need for the certification exam. "She treats my goals just as seriously as the kids going to college," he said with appreciation. "Some adults act like if you're not going to university, you're not trying hard enough, but misunderstands that there are different paths to success." This individualized approach to student support revealed another dimension of wisdom that James found remarkable. She didn't apply a one-size-fits-all model to helping young people, but instead took time to understand each person's strengths, interests, and circumstances before developing appropriate support strategies. As the afternoon progressed, James found himself in conversation with David, the center's part-time director, who was himself a product of the program. David had grown up in the neighborhood, received mentoring and college support at Lincoln Park, earned a degree in social work, and now dedicated his career to providing the same opportunities to the next generation of students. "Is the heart of this place," David told James candidly. "When I was in high school, she helped me understand that college was actually possible for someone like me. She didn't just encourage me to dream big, She helped me create concrete plans for achieving those dreams. She edited my essays, drove me to campus visits, even helped my family understand the financial aid process. David went on to explain that influence extended far beyond individual students. She's helped us develop relationships with local businesses for internship opportunities. She's connected us with college admissions counselors who volunteer their time here. When we needed new computers for the lab, she somehow found donors who were upgrading their equipment. She sees connections and possibilities that the rest of us miss. As James listened to David's description of his impact, he began to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented in his experience. Had essentially created an informal but highly effective social service network, using her modest resources to leverage far greater contributions from others. She had become a kind of community organizer, though she would never have used that term to describe herself. Later in the afternoon, James observed leading a workshop on financial literacy for a group of 16 and 17-year-olds. She covered topics like understanding credit scores, avoiding predatory lending, and building savings accounts, practical knowledge that would serve these young people throughout their lives, but that was rarely taught in traditional educational settings. Many of you will be handling your own finances soon, told the group, and the financial industry is full of people who will try to take advantage of young adults who don't understand how money works. Learning to protect yourself financially is just as important as any academic subject you study. During a break in the workshop, one of the students approached James directly. It was a 15-year-old whose mother worked as a house cleaner and whose father was frequently unemployed due to health problems. Despite these challenges, maintained a 3.8 GPA and dreamed of becoming a nurse. Miss taught me to think about money differently, explained with remarkable maturity. She showed me how to save even small amounts consistently and how compound interest can help your money grow over time. She opened a savings account for me with $25 from her own money, and now I contribute $5 from my part-time job every week. It's not much, but she says I'm building good habits that will serve me for the rest of my life. The sophistication of this approach to youth development continued to amaze James. She wasn't just addressing immediate needs, but was actively working to break cycles of poverty by teaching young people skills and mindsets that would enable them to create stability for themselves and their future families. As the day's activities wound down, James helped and the other volunteers clean up the center. During this quiet time, he had an opportunity to process what he had observed and to ask about her long-term vision for the work. "Do you ever think about expanding these programs?" he asked as they stacked chairs and wiped down tables. "It seems like what you're doing here could benefit many more young people if it had greater resources and reach." Paused in her cleaning to consider the question thoughtfully. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "There are so many more children who could benefit from this kind of support, but I also worry about losing the personal touch that makes these programs effective. When you know every student individually, when you can adapt your approach to their specific needs and circumstances, that's when real transformation happens." She gestured toward the computer lab where Tyler was still working on scholarship applications. If this program served 500 students instead of 50, would Tyler have gotten the 3 hours of individual attention he needed for his personal statement? Would I have been able to connect Jasmine with the veterinarian who gave her real-world experience? I don't know how to scale up without losing the relationships that make everything else possible. Her concern highlighted a fundamental challenge in social services that James had never fully appreciated. In business, growth and efficiency were almost always positive goals. But in human services, there were trade-offs between reach and depth, between serving more people and serving people more effectively. Had instinctively chosen depth over breadth, quality over quantity. What if there were ways to maintain that personal approach while serving more students? James asked. More staff, more volunteers, additional funding for one-on-one support. His eyes lit up with possibilities, but her response remained grounded in practical realities. Additional resources would certainly help. We could serve dinner to students who stay late, provide transportation for those who live farther away, offer more advanced computer courses. But the key would be finding the right people to do the work. This isn't just about having good intentions. It requires people who understand how to build trust with young people who have good reasons to be skeptical of adults' promises. As they finished cleaning and prepared to lock up the center, introduced James to several parents who had come to pick up their teenagers. Each conversation revealed another dimension of community impact. She knew family situations, understood economic pressures, and somehow managed to provide support to parents as well as students. Martinez, Tyler's mother, worked double shifts at a local hospital and rarely had time to help her son navigate the college application process. Has been like a second mother to Tyler, told James gratefully. She sees potential in these children that sometimes we're too tired or too worried to see ourselves. She gives them hope, but more than that, she gives them practical tools to make their dreams come true. During the drive home that evening, James found himself processing everything he had witnessed over the past few days. Work represented a completely different model of social impact than anything he had encountered in his business career or philanthropic activities. She had proven that sustained personal commitment could be more powerful than large financial donations, that knowing individual stories could lead to more effective interventions than broad policy initiatives. But perhaps most importantly, had shown him that meaningful change happened through relationships rather than transactions. Her success with young people wasn't based on superior resources or institutional credibility, but on her willingness to show up consistently, to invest personal time and attention in individual lives, and to approach each person as a whole human being rather than as a problem to be solved. As James arrived at his penthouse apartment, he realized that everything he thought he knew about effective philanthropy had been challenged by a woman who earned less in a year than he spent on a single vacation. Washington had become his teacher, showing him possibilities he had never imagined and raising questions about the true purpose of wealth and success. Sunday morning found James Henderson in an unfamiliar place, sitting in the back pew of Methodist Church, watching Washington lead a children's choir through rehearsal for the upcoming service. The scene before him represented yet another facet of community involvement, one that blended her faith with her commitment to youth development in ways that challenged his assumptions about the intersection of religion and social action. The children, ranging in age from 8 to 14, were practicing a hymn about hope and perseverance, stood before them with the same patient attention she brought to tutoring sessions and college application workshops, helping each child find their voice while creating harmony as a group. Her approach to music education reflected the same principles James had observed in her other work: high expectations combined with unconditional support, individual attention within a community framework. After the rehearsal, introduced James to Pastor Williams, an elderly man whose weathered hands and warm smile spoke of decades serving this predominantly African-American congregation. The pastor explained that had been volunteering with the church's youth programs for over 15 years, helping to create an after-school program that served children whose families were dealing with various forms of crisis. Understand something that many well-meaning people miss, Pastor Williams told James as they walked toward the church's fellowship hall. These children need more than just material assistance. They need adults who see their potential, who believe in their futures, and who are willing to invest time in helping them develop character alongside academic skills. The after-school program focused specifically on children from families experiencing instability, parents dealing with job loss, housing insecurity, health crises, or other emergency situations. Explained that these children often struggled with anxiety and behavioral problems that could interfere with their academic progress if not addressed with patience and understanding. When a child's family is facing eviction or a parent is seriously ill, it's hard for them to concentrate on homework, said as she showed James through the church's education wing. We try to create a stable, predictable environment where they can feel safe enough to focus on learning and growing. In one classroom, James observed working with a group of 10-year-olds on reading comprehension. But her approach went far beyond basic literacy instruction. She helped the children connect the stories they read to their own experiences, encouraging them to think critically about characters' decisions and to imagine different outcomes for challenging situations. When reading a story about a family facing financial difficulties, guided the children through a discussion about problem-solving strategies, community resources, and the importance of asking for help when needed. Sometimes grown-ups face problems that are too big to solve alone, she told them gently. That's why we have churches and community centers and neighbors who care about each other. It's not shameful to need help, it's part of being human. James realized that was simultaneously teaching reading skills and emotional resilience, helping children develop both academic competence and psychological tools for coping with the instability in their lives. Her integrated approach to education addressed the whole child rather than just academic performance. Later in the afternoon, introduced James to several families whose children participated in the program. Each conversation revealed the depth of understanding about the complex challenges facing working-class families in urban environments. She knew which children qualified for free lunch programs, which families were struggling with medical bills, which parents were working multiple jobs and needed reliable child care. Maria Santos, a single mother of 3, explained how this program had provided stability for her youngest son during a particularly difficult period. "When I lost my job last year and we had to move in with my sister's family, everything felt chaotic for," Maria said. "But he could still come here every afternoon, and Miss made sure he kept up with his schoolwork and felt loved and supported even when everything else in his life was uncertain." Had not only provided academic support but had also helped Maria navigate the complex process of applying for emergency assistance programs and had connected her with job training resources that eventually led to better employment. "She sees the whole family," Maria continued, "not just the child. She understands that helping parents become more stable is often the key to helping children succeed." This systemic approach to family support impressed James deeply. Rather than treating childhood problems as isolated issues, addressed the underlying family dynamics and economic pressures that contributed to academic and behavioral difficulties. Her work represented a sophisticated understanding of how poverty affected child development and what kinds of interventions could be most effective. As the afternoon program concluded, James helped load supplies into her car for transportation to her apartment. She had purchased art materials, snacks, and small gifts for children who had achieved specific academic milestones during the week. The careful way she allocated these modest rewards showed the same strategic thinking she applied to all aspects of her youth work. James said as they prepared to leave the church, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've shown me over the past few days. I'd like to discuss some possibilities for supporting your work, but I want to make sure I approach this in the right way." Turned to look at him directly, her expression serious but hopeful. "What did you have in mind, Mr. Henderson?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," James admitted honestly. "But I know that what you're doing is having real impact, and I believe that with additional resources, we could help many more children while maintaining the personal approach that makes your programs so effective." They arranged to meet the following week to discuss specific possibilities, but James could see both excitement and wariness in his expression. She had obviously thought about the potential benefits of increased funding, but she also understood the risks that came with external financial support. That evening, James spent hours researching effective models for scaling grassroots social programs. What he discovered reinforced concerns about maintaining quality while expanding reach. Many well-intentioned efforts to grow successful community programs had resulted in bureaucratization and loss of the personal relationships that made them effective in the first place. But James also found examples of partnerships between wealthy individuals and community leaders that had managed to preserve local control and cultural authenticity while significantly expanding impact. The key seemed to be ensuring that community leaders remained in charge of program design and implementation, while external funders focused on removing financial barriers and providing infrastructure support. Over the next several days, James found himself thinking constantly about his work and its implications for his own life and priorities. For the first time, he began to seriously question the allocation of his time and resources. His typical week involved managing investments, attending board meetings, and participating in social events that, while financially productive, seemed increasingly hollow compared to the purposeful work he had observed in his community programs. The following Wednesday, James made an unprecedented decision. He cleared his calendar for the entire afternoon and asked to give him a comprehensive tour of all 3 programs she supported, along with detailed explanations of their budgets, staffing needs, and expansion possibilities. He approached this meeting with the same systematic analysis he would bring to evaluating a potential business acquisition, but with entirely different goals in mind. Had clearly prepared extensively for this conversation. She brought notebooks filled with detailed information about each program's operations, including precise records of her own financial contributions, volunteer hours contributed by various individuals, and specific outcomes achieved by participating children. Her documentation was more thorough than many corporate reports James had reviewed. At the community center, introduced James to the center's founder, Mrs. Williams, who had started the program in her own home 20 years earlier. Mrs. Williams explained the center's philosophy and approach, emphasizing the importance of creating a family-like atmosphere where children felt unconditionally loved and supported. "We don't just provide services," Mrs. Williams said. "We build relationships that last for years. Many of our former participants come back as volunteers when they're older, creating a cycle of community investment that goes far beyond any specific program or funding source." James learned that the center operated on an annual budget of just $45,000, serving 60 children consistently throughout the year. Personal contributions covered nearly 20% of this budget, but more importantly, her volunteer time and relationship-building efforts were essential to the program's success. "Without, we couldn't maintain the level of individual attention that makes everything else possible," Mrs. Williams explained. "She knows every child's story, every family situation. When problems arise, she's often the first person we call because she understands both the child's needs and the family's resources." At Lincoln Park, Director David provided similar insights about its irreplaceable role in the program's effectiveness. "Doesn't just volunteer here," he said. "She's essentially our unpaid associate director. She handles college application support, coordinates with local employers for internship opportunities, and maintains relationships with dozens of families in the community." David showed James detailed records of student outcomes from the program. Over the past 5 years, 87% of participating high school seniors had graduated on time, compared to 62% district-wide. 73% had enrolled in either college or post-secondary training programs, compared to 41% district-wide. Most remarkably, 96% of program participants had never been arrested or involved with the juvenile justice system. "These outcomes don't happen by accident," David emphasized. "They result from consistent, long-term relationships with adults who believe in these young people and provide concrete support for their goals. Is the common thread that connects individual success stories to broader program impact." At church, Pastor Williams provided a different perspective on its community role. "Understands that spiritual development and practical support go hand in hand," he explained. "She helps children and families address immediate needs while also building the kind of character and resilience that will serve them throughout their lives." The pastor described how it helped families navigate everything from eviction proceedings to medical crises, often serving as an advocate and coordinator who connected people with appropriate resources. "She's become a one-woman social service agency," he said with obvious admiration. "But she does it with the kind of personal caring that institutional programs often can't provide." By the end of their tour, James had a comprehensive understanding of both the scope and the sophistication of community work. She had essentially created an integrated network of youth development programs that addressed academic, social, emotional, and practical needs, while maintaining the personal relationships that ensured individual attention and cultural responsiveness. But James also recognized that this approach, while incredibly effective, was ultimately limited by her individual capacity and resources. She was working at the maximum level her time and energy would allow, and her modest salary restricted her ability to provide additional financial support even when she identified urgent needs. That evening, James spent hours developing what he privately called the model, a framework for scaling her approach to youth development that would preserve the essential elements of personal relationship and community control, while dramatically expanding the resources available for direct service. The plan he developed would require a significant personal commitment from him, but for the first time in his career, James Henderson was prepared to measure success by something other than profit margins and market share. He was ready to learn what it meant to invest in individual lives rather than institutional structures, to build Ray 6 months later. The transformation in both James Henderson's life and Washington's community programs had exceeded everyone's expectations. What had begun as a billionaire's curiosity about his janitor's charitable work had evolved into a revolutionary model for community-based youth development that was attracting attention from social service professionals across the country. The changes started small but grew exponentially. James's initial contribution of $50,000 to each of 3 programs had immediate and visible impact. The community center was able to expand its evening hours and serve dinner to all participating children. Lincoln Park purchased new computers and hired a part-time college counselor. It's created a weekend program for families dealing with crisis situations. But more significant than the financial support was James's decision to restructure his own life around meaningful engagement with the community programs. He had reduced his direct involvement in Henderson Global Industries' day-to-day operations, promoting his longtime deputy to chief executive while retaining his role as chairman. This change freed up 20 to 30 hours per week that he now dedicated to what he privately called university, his ongoing education in effective community development. 3 evenings a week, James could be found at one of the community centers, working directly with young people on everything from homework assistance to career planning. His business background proved surprisingly valuable in helping high school students understand financial literacy, develop entrepreneurship skills, and navigate college application processes. But the young people taught him even more than he taught them, opening his eyes to resilience, creativity, and hope he had never imagined possible. The partnership between James and had developed into something neither of them had initially envisioned. Rather than simply funding her existing programs, James had become a genuine collaborator, bringing his strategic thinking and resource access to complement's community knowledge and relationship-building skills. Together, they had created an approach that maintained the personal touch insisted upon while dramatically expanding the reach and sophistication of services available to participating families. One of their most innovative developments was the creation of family support coordinators for each program, experienced community members who worked part-time to provide intensive case management for families dealing with multiple challenges. Train these coordinators personally, ensuring they understood her philosophy of addressing root causes rather than just symptoms, of building on family strengths rather than focusing only on problems. Maria Santos, the single mother James had met had become one of these family coordinators after completing a certification program in social services that James had funded. Her lived experience with poverty and housing instability, combined with formal training in resource coordination, made her uniquely effective at helping other families navigate complex social service systems. When Miss first suggested I could become a family coordinator, I thought she was crazy, Maria told James during a program evaluation meeting. I was the person who needed help, not someone who could help others, but she saw leadership potential in me that I didn't know existed. Now I'm helping 15 families access services and advocacy support, and I'm earning enough to move my children into a stable housing situation for the first time in years. This model of promoting community members into leadership roles had become a cornerstone of the expanded programs. Rather than bringing in outside professionals who might not understand local culture and challenges, James invested in training people who already had community trust and shared life experiences with program participants. The result was a staff team that could provide both professional competence and cultural authenticity. Tyler Martinez, the young man James had met working on college applications, had graduated as valedictorian of his high school class and received a full scholarship to study engineering at the state university. But his connection to the Lincoln Park program continued as he returned on weekends and school breaks to mentor younger students. Tyler credited with helping him understand that academic success was just the beginning of his potential contribution to his community. Miss taught me that getting a good education isn't just about improving your own life, Tyler explained to a group of current high school students. It's about developing the knowledge and skills you need to come back and help lift up other people in your community. Success isn't measured by how far you climb above where you started, but by how many people you can help climb with you. The ripple effects of this philosophy were becoming visible throughout the community. Former program participants were returning as volunteers and staff members, creating a sustainable cycle of investment and leadership development. Parents who had initially come seeking help for their children were becoming advocates for other families and leaders in community organizing efforts. James had also discovered that his business contacts were eager to support the programs once they understood the model and saw the results. Rather than simply asking for financial donations, he invited successful executives and entrepreneurs to visit the centers and interact directly with participating young people. These encounters often led to internship opportunities, mentoring relationships, and job placement assistance that benefited both the students and the business community. The technology company that managed Henderson Global's computer systems donated new equipment to all three centers and provided technical support training for older participants. A local bank partnered with the programs to offer financial literacy workshops and helped participating families open savings accounts with matched contribution incentives. A construction company created apprenticeship opportunities for young adults interested in skilled trades. These business partnerships worked because they were based on genuine relationships rather than abstract corporate social responsibility initiatives. The executives involved got to know individual students and families, understanding their specific needs and goals rather than simply supporting a generic, worthy cause. The personal connections created accountability and long-term commitment that sustained these partnerships even when economic conditions changed. Its role in all these developments had evolved as well. While she continued to work part-time for Henderson Global Industries, a job she loved and considered part of her community service, she now also served as Community Programs Director for what had become known as the Henderson Washington Foundation. The foundation operated with an unusual structure that preserved community control while providing substantial resources for program expansion. Rather than creating a traditional charitable foundation with a distant board of directors, James had established an entity where community members held majority voting control over all programmatic decisions, served as executive director, with final authority over program design, staffing decisions, and resource allocation. James provided funding and strategic support, but deliberately limited his formal authority to ensure that the programs remained community-driven. This governance structure had attracted attention from other wealthy individuals interested in supporting community development work. Several had visited the programs and adopted similar approaches in their own cities, creating a network of community-controlled foundations that shared resources, strategies, and best practices. Dr. Williams, the original founder of the community center, had become a sought-after consultant for organizations seeking to replicate the James partnership model. "What makes this work," she explained to visitors, "is that both partners understood they had essential but different contributions to make, brought community knowledge, relationships, and wisdom about effective youth development. James brought financial resources, business acumen, and connections to opportunities. But most importantly, they both brought humility and willingness to learn from each other." The measurable outcomes from the expanded programs exceeded everyone's expectations. Academic achievement among participating students had improved dramatically, with standardized test scores averaging 20% higher than district norms. High school graduation rates reached 94% among program participants. College enrollment had increased to 81%, with retention rates significantly higher than national averages for first-generation college students. But the outcomes went beyond academic measures. Participating families reported improved financial stability, better access to healthcare and social services, and increased confidence in advocating for their children's needs. The programs had become catalysts for broader community development, inspiring residents to organize around issues like housing quality, neighborhood safety, and local economic development. James's personal transformation had been equally dramatic. Friends and colleagues noted that he seemed more engaged and energetic than he had in years. His approach to business had become more collaborative and socially conscious, incorporating community benefit considerations into corporate decision-making processes. He spoke frequently about how working with, and the young people in the programs had taught him more about leadership and innovation than all his previous business experiences combined. "I spent 30 years thinking that success meant accumulating resources and power," James reflected during a speech to other business leaders. "Taught me that real success means using whatever resources and power you have to create opportunities for others to achieve their own success. The return on investment in human potential is infinitely greater than anything the stock market can offer." The partnership between James and had also inspired changes within Henderson Global Industries itself. The company had implemented extensive community benefit programs, including scholarship funds for children of all employees, partnerships with local schools for internship and mentoring programs, and procurement policies that prioritized minority and women-owned businesses. More significantly, the company had embraced what James called stakeholder capitalism, an approach that measured success not just by shareholder returns, but by the company's contribution to employee, community development, and environmental sustainability. This philosophy had actually improved the company's financial performance as employee satisfaction increased, and the company's reputation for social responsibility attracted both customers and talented workers. On a warm spring evening, exactly 1 year after their first visit to the community center together, James and stood in the same room where their partnership had begun. The space had been transformed with new furniture, updated technology, and colorful artwork created by participating children. But the energy and warmth that had originally impressed James remained unchanged. Around them, 60 children were engaged in various activities, some working on homework with volunteer tutors, others participating in art projects, still others preparing for a student talent show. Parents and community members moved through the room, some helping with activities, others attending workshops on topics like digital literacy and job training skills. "Look what we've accomplished together," James said too, gesturing at the bustling scene around them. Smiled, but her response reflected the wisdom that had guided their partnership from the beginning. "Look what these children and families have accomplished for themselves," she corrected gently. "We just helped remove some of the barriers that were standing in their way." As they watched Tyler Martinez explaining college application procedures to a group of high school juniors, and Maria Santos leading a workshop for parents on advocacy strategies, and Jasmine, now a pre-veterinary student, tutoring younger children in science, and James could see the sustainable impact of their work. The young people who had benefited from the programs were becoming leaders and mentors themselves, creating a cycle of investment and return that would continue long beyond any individual donor's involvement. The community had developed its own capacity for identifying and addressing challenges, reducing dependence on external resources while maintaining partnerships that provided ongoing support and opportunity. "This is what I always dreamed was possible," told James as they prepared to leave that evening. "Not just helping individual children succeed, but helping an entire community develop the confidence and skills to solve its own problems and create its own opportunities." James nodded, understanding finally what had been trying to teach him from their very first conversation. Effective philanthropy wasn't about giving money to make yourself feel generous. It was about building relationships that empowered people to transform their own lives and communities. It required patience, humility, and a willingness to measure success by other people's achievements rather than your own recognition. As they walked toward their cars, James reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning when he had first noticed humming while she cleaned his conference room. She had introduced him to a world of purpose and meaning that no business success could match, showing him how wealth could become a tool for justice rather than just accumulation. For her part, had discovered that her small acts of service could indeed be scaled up without losing their personal touch. Through partnership with someone who shared her values but brought different resources, she had been able to touch hundreds of lives while maintaining the relationships and community connections that made her work effective. Their unlikely partnership had proven that real social change happened not through grand gestures or institutional programs, but through sustained commitment to individual relationships and community-driven solutions. Together, they had created something neither could have accomplished alone, a model for using privilege and resources in service of human potential and community empowerment. As drove home to her small apartment and James returned to his penthouse, both carried the satisfaction of knowing that their day's work had contributed to something larger than themselves. In classrooms and community centers across the city, young people were discovering their own potential, families were building stability and hope, and a community was learning to believe in its own power to create change. The billionaire had found his purpose, and the janitor had found her partner. Together, they had discovered that the most important wealth is the wealth we create for others, and the greatest return on investment comes from investing in human beings rather than financial instruments. Their story had become a testament to what becomes possible when resources are combined with wisdom, when privilege is used in service of justice, and when different people come together in shared commitment to the belief that every child deserves the chance to reach their full potential rather than simply write checks. The conversation he was about to have with would determine whether his wealth could become a tool for the kind of transformation she had dedicated her life to creating. The next morning, James made a decision that would change the trajectory of both their lives. He was ready to move beyond curiosity and observation toward genuine partnership, and action his understanding of what it truly meant to make a difference in the world. For the first time in years, James Henderson found himself questioning the true meaning of success and wondering if he had been measuring his life by the wrong standards entirely.